Today, I'm lucky enough to have Zach Higginbotham, who is a reconditioning and applied performance coordinator at California, Berkeley. Our key topic for today's chat will be everything you need to know when it comes to high performing collegiate programs. So, whether you're a developing athlete, a parent of a developing athlete, or of course, high performance staff, you're definitely going to get some takeaways. So, get the notebook out. Welcome, Zach. Thanks for jumping on.
Hey, how you doing, guys? And Jack, I really appreciate you for bringing me on, inviting me to be on the call with you today. And I've heard a lot of great things about you and what you're doing on the call, and I'm really thankful to hop on and get to talk to you and help out where I can today.
Absolutely. If we can get 1/10 of the impact of the story off pre show, I think we're in for a killer show, mate. But for those that aren't aware of your work, take us through your background, how you got into the industry, I guess where you sort of fell in love with it, and the gigs you've had along the way before the California one.
Yeah, so background wise, so pre-show stories, we'll edit those as they go, and we'll make it relevant as needed. But background on me, so my background is obviously I'm an applied science reconditioning coordinator at Cal Berkeley. Um, previously, I've been anywhere. Previously, I was previously at Ole Miss. Before that, I've been at Florida Atlantic University, Colorado State, Ohio State, University of Nevada. Played at Marshall. Played football, American football, Marshall University, University of Cincinnati. Um, I don't think I've been anywhere else. At least I don't think so. Uh, yeah, don't think so. Anyway, so background wise, I started obviously playing in high school, was lucky enough to play in college. Tried to play in college best I could. But obviously, with my role, there was a reason why I kind of fell in the role I did. And my college career didn't obviously work out the way I wanted it to. I was actually one of my athletes I work with now. I was hurt a bunch when I played and I didn't have the career I wanted to, and
Hmm.
I didn't have the whole return to play reconditioning experience. I was just kind of, oh well, you can't do X Y Z. You have ABC injury, or you have this constraint. So go stand over there, go to this machine, do this till we tell you to come over, and you can do this, and then we'll deal with X Y Z till you get there, and we'll figure it out as we go, and we'll kind of whiteboard it and figure it out. That for me and then I didn't really know much of I was just kind of, being a good athlete, being respectful, doing what I was told, trying to be a good teammate, being a good teammate, good member of the team, good member of the locker room. But looking back on it, I missed a lot of part of my development and reconditioning and coming back. And honestly, as much as my genetic ceiling allowed me to be, it probably limited me coming back to what I could be. And you know, I wasn't probably going to be an NFL Hall of Famer, but who knows? Maybe I could have been a little bit better, could have did a little bit more. And I think coming back, always knew I was going to get into coaching. Maybe not exactly the role I'm in now, but I think for me, the role I'm in now is a small part of me trying to give back to athletes what I didn't get when I played. And I
Hmm.
think for me, it's a big piece for me internally where I can kind of ask questions and always feel like I have kind of a higher calling. I'm able to kind of ask and be inquisitive and ask questions why and kind of be that annoying person of why do we do this? And it kind of allows me to kind of search for answers and always kind of be pushing for more and reasons why. So I think that's my background of why I do what I do and the roles I've kind of been in.
It's interesting, and from the development of the industry, I guess at a collegiate level, like, is there bigger funds and bigger, staff departments towards the medical and high performance to allow for reconditioning coaches, or is it simply the more, I guess, athletes like yourself that have had those experiences where injuries have had significant impact in how long they've been able to play and the level they've been able to play at, has then created these roles, do you think, at that college level?
At the collegiate level and university level, I think it really depends. I think honestly, just subjectively, from what I've seen and been told in my experiences, I think 10 years ago it was almost non-existent from a strength conditioning perspective. It was more so of prior experiences or really anecdotally to the staff you had and the personnel you had staffing. And I think you see a lot more of it now because, as you said, it's being seen and realized as a pivotal role. especially
Mm.
if you have that ace in your pocket that somebody can handle that. But when we talk about high performance and kind of that performance management ecosystem and ecological dynamics we talk about, especially when you look at the international model or the professional sport model, it's still in the university setting without getting too off track. It's still relatively in the infancy stage at the university level in the American sport. But
Mhm.
where the return to play reconditioning piece comes into play, to be honest, at the university level, from what I've seen on average, it's when a strength conditioning department tries to put an emphasis and basically does their SWOT analysis or is very objective in where they need to fill their gaps in their buckets, whether it's in staffing or in personnel or where they're missing links and in their time loss and injury. And somebody it's an outside hire or somebody on staff that they're trying to bring in or promote within to develop to handle on staff. Just because the way, for example, in the NCAA rules as of right now, you can only have five full-time strength conditioning coaches on staff. Now, that's not to say there aren't interns and things like that, but it gets a little dicey in how that gets managed. But in theory, you can only have five full-time strength conditioning coaches. So most coaches in years prior, or excuse me, in past, most coaches don't want to give up a full-time strength coach. When most in American football, per se, you have 100 to 120 athletes. They don't want to give up one of those five coaches to go work with, or how they view it, babysitting 5 individual kids, to give them individual programs, and they don't want those kids doing something completely different, or because they see it as not helping the team or being different or not. So it just depends. I think there's some other programs and universities are doing it different. They're hiring outside staffs. You see rehab coordinators, you see physiotherapists getting hired under the medical umbrella that are more on that physiotherapist with the CSCS, which is kind of like the ESSA certification over here in America. You see some things like that,
Mm.
um, but you don't necessarily see a true reconditioning rehab coordinator role where they kind of work laterally with the strength conditioning, sports science, medical, and everything kind of works underneath a performance manager, high performance manager, or so on and so forth. It's kind of how does that university or athletic department or that team operate? How do they handle and hire their personnel? So it's really case dependent.
Yeah.
I think it's becoming, yeah, not to get too long with it, I think it's becoming more of a noticeable piece, but it's truly case dependent how it's set up.
And is that, do you think the inconsistencies because there's so much talent that if one gets injured, there's someone knocking on the door, an easy replace? Is that, or is it just simply because you've only got so much that you can spend on, like you said, five staff for that a volume of athletes? You sort of have to prioritize towards the main team.
Um, I don't think it's so much of the first one. I think it's more of the second one. I think it's more so of, at least in my experience, so you speak. I think when you look at it globally in the university setting, when you look at all Olympic, like I said, if you look at all sports, normally most of the other teams that you're going to see in a university setting, the roster sizes are going to be on the smaller size. So you're only going to have one, per se, strength coach working with that team. So
Mm.
baseball, basketball, even for us, like here at Cal, like we have one strength coach working with men's and women's rowing, and those teams are 50 kids. Our rugby 15s and our rugby and our sevens, our men's sevens team plays out of our 15. They kind of get cannibalized. They all work under one umbrella. They all have one coach, so it's kind of it all kind of gets eaten up, and that's typically everywhere. And
Yeah.
I honestly don't know of many places that have a rehab coordinator or a reconditioning coach, strength coach that works for other teams or for a department. If there is one, I would like to know and like to see how it's set up. I would like to think I know a lot of people in that area, but I haven't seen it. So if there is one, reach out to me because I want to know how your department set it up because I would be interested. But speaking towards football, where I think it's more common, commonplace on average. I think again, one, it goes back to the second point we brought up, where it's kind of people don't want to coaches don't want to allocate resources, and I think
Yeah.
that goes a lot to one, allocation of resources, and I think some of that goes to tradition, how they see things and how they view kind of tradition, hard work. Um, it's kind of similar to like rugby in a sense, where everybody needs to be doing the same thing, dress the same, socks the same color, shoes the same color, shoes tucked in. If everybody squats, everybody back squats, and the same colored plates and logos turned up, and like everybody, like especially like in like American football, like all strength coaches like to say, keep Plan B as close to Plan A as possible. Okay, that's cool, but like it's all super redundant. Um,
Mm.
but what if Plan B doesn't fit? What if Plan B looks different for player Z than it does for player X, but it's still all Plan B for that person, right?
Yeah, 100%.
So I think it's a little bit of resources, and I think some of it is a little bit of if you also depending how much you follow over an American sport, the kind of the changing of guard a little bit. The same way you look at like nationally or internationally or even socially, kind of these like social Gen Z boomers, kind of like generation like Y, X, Y, whatever these screw. You see all these different like social gaps. So
Hmm.
I think you see that in the profession too. So I think it depends where you see a lot more forward thinking depending on like the age gaps or where you see that. And I think in football, specifically I think some of the older generation kind of older gaps, that's something they weren't brought up with and brought up with something that was new to them on average. So I think that's something it's not in the forefront of their mind to where something in the younger generations and younger coming up where the technology, the sports science, the analytics, so to speak, as everybody likes to say, the being objective. And I think it fits under that umbrella. So it's a little bit more commonplace. And I think, again, as we just get a little further out, it's going to be a little bit more prevalent on average. So I think it's a little bit of everything.
Yeah, for sure. That makes a lot of sense. Thanks for sharing insights. Good to speak to
Mhm.
someone who's obviously got finger on the pulse. And going back to your career journey, who have been some strong influences or mentors, if you like, that have helped shape your coaching style or philosophy?
When it comes to mentors, I think I've been kind of pushed around. They kind of sculpted, mentored, and even bullied a little bit, so to speak. It depends how you want to look at it. Certain things, which I think has helped, different aspects around the way. So I think even when it comes to earlier on in my career, when I look at running a program from a culture organization, especially when you look at like running a roster of anywhere from 80 to 120 guys in a given year. When I look at one of my first experiences when I was at Ohio State, working for my career was like Mickey Marotti, who's kind of like on that like Mount Rushmore, and at least in American football, of kind of like strength coaches in that aspect of kind of the team culture, kind of having a finger on the pulse, like having a finger on the pulse of the team, understand what's going on. That was kind of something I took away from him. That was somebody I like really understood, kind of looked back and really kind of had a good idea on that piece. Is something I learned a lot from him. But when it comes from X's and O's, guys like Al Vermeil, Johnny Parker, Rod Panarello, Al Miller, those are all kind of like my like pseudo like step grandfathers, all kind of weird way though. Yeah, if you've ever read like a book called The System, it's they're a group of old strength coaches from the 20th century, from anywhere from like the 70s all the way up to the 2000s, that basically were some of the first American strength coaches that went over to Russia and went over to Russia and pulled some of the guys out from the old USS, some of the old Russian strength coaches of the USSR, and basically had them sit down and start translating a lot of the Russian textbooks and building out periodization. Like, what is it? Out of so you start looking at some of the old Western linear periodization, and it started bringing some of the actual concepts that we talk about today outside of Western linear periodization. Like those guys itself, and then honestly, out of all those guys, everybody at least knows who Alfred Meal is. With the Chicago Bulls, the 49ers, Michael Jordan, Joe Montana, Jerry Rice. Like, he's the only straight coach to win a major championship in like three multiple professional leagues. So like those guys are all guys that I've learned from. And then obviously Matt Pell, who's always from over your neck of the woods, is somebody I would consider a mentor and a friend. Kier Wenham Flats, one of my best friends and mentors, Terrence Cannell. These guys are all people that I really look up to and I learn from. There's a lot of other people, But those are probably the main people I would say I would look up to and I really look to.
Awesome. And highlights over your careers, sort of, I guess, moments or experiences that sort of spring front of mind that you're proud of?
I think the biggest moment kind of for me was probably a 2021 season at Ole Miss when we went to the Sugar Bowl and we went 10-3. That was honestly like a big learning experience in a good way and in a bad way because it was a really hard year for me in terms of growth because there was a lot of pressure and there was a lot of, but in a good way because we had a lot of really good players. It was a lot of I was being asked to do a lot and I was asked to grow a lot and I was being asked and I was being counted on to get, especially in a reconditioning side, to get a lot of really key important players back to do really well for us. And thankfully, I was able to do that. A lot of those guys really helped us that year. And thankfully, a lot of those guys ended up going on and they're currently are on their track to have good NFL careers and things like that. And I learned a lot from those guys and being able to work with those guys and frankly, those coaches itself. That was a big year for me. So I think that season of that year was probably collectively was like a big highlight of my career that I really look back on, was really happy and thankful for.
Awesome. And the flip side, Zach, obviously, like you mentioned, with sport and elite sport comes pressure. Would have been some sort of moments or situations where you've been significantly challenged, and how did you grow, or what did you learn from those experiences?
Um, there's been a lot. I think from I think it depends. I think it comes from learning experiences when I think early on in my career, I think when you kind of learn what the profession is, I think probably my first job outside of well, probably one of my first big jobs, probably when I was at Ohio State as a professional intern. That was probably one of my first big jobs, but that was probably the hardest from kind of that learning curve when you go from, oh, I'm an actual adult now, not just I'm an adult on paper from my birth certificate says I'm an adult. I have a couple of bills or, oh, nobody actually cares about me and I need to pull my own weight. And, I got bills and responsibilities and I got to make the transition from a player to a coach. That was probably a big point. And then I think honestly, when I got the Cal, and Cal is still to this day is a really hard, big job, and it's been a big 18-month learning curve till this day because it's been such a different job, and it's been completely 180 different learning experience than anywhere I've been. And there's still cases I work with here where it's completely textbook flipped upside down of what I expect something to be, whether it be the athletes, the experience, the context, and whether you call that hard, different, situational, however you want to look at it. I think for me, when what we would expect things to be black and white, simple, hard, complex, however you want to look at it, like that for me has been a challenge. So I think those are like key points for me I look at.
I will dive into the key topic, mate. So, high performance collegiate programs. Obviously, you've seen a few. What are sort of the essential elements, do you think, for a high performing collegiate program?
I think honestly, the first one's alignment. I think alignment in principles and objectives. So objectives are going to come in principles. So principles are simply what do we view as important? What's important to us? What is important? What do we value? And then how are we going to get that done? And how are we going to measure that? Right, being in our objectives. Right, and everybody famously saying, are we all going to row the boat in the right direction, right? Are we aligned in our value and our principles? Are we aligned in our objectives? Are we aligning how we're going to get there? And are we aligned in our setup? So I think that's probably the hardest thing in the collegiate setting because it's so inconsistent because it's in the infancy stage. Most people don't really understand truly what it takes or what it is. And it's kind of not fly by the seat of your pants, but everybody's kind of figuring out as they go because it's such a new concept. So I think that's the biggest piece. If you figure out the principles and the alignment within that, I think that's the biggest piece. And that's going to happen to top down from administration saying, okay, this is what we want to be, this is what we want to do, this is what we believe in, and we want to hire, we want to recruit, hire, and retain the best people possible for these jobs that fit what we want to do. And sometimes that means that they're not connected to the head coach. They're not connected to this department. We want to retain that. We want to retain talent. We want to develop and we want to retain talent within those departments. And we want to incentivize those people. And too often in the university setting, that doesn't happen because of funding, salary pools, how employees' contracts are set up, staffing situations. So it makes all those different things hard. So employees come and go, coaches come and go, staffing turnover. So it makes all those things really hard. And so you have to be able to get that done first before you do everything else. And then once you get that done, and then you can set up how you're aligning all those departments. Because once you do that, then you got to figure out from the administration standpoint, sport coach, well, no matter what sport or all sports, medical, performance, nutrition, if you're able to have it, because that's the other thing too, is not every athletic department, university has a nutrition department. Not every athletic department has physiotherapists. Sometimes it's just athletic trainers. And to be honest, like on average, there's a big difference, but like on average, there's a big difference between the two. Uh, so they're trained a little bit differently. And there's a big difference. So the quality and the care and what you're going to get there sometimes can be different. So that can change what you're going to do and how you're going to see things and how you're going to attack things. From our performance department, sometimes you're going to have 5 coaches for 15 sports. So how you're going to treat, handle, and drive performance and handle care of your athletes, that's going to change. So how do we handle that? How are we going to drive funding? And then your sport coaches, right? How are we going to objectively measure and monitor performance? How are we going to handle staffing situations? And I think overall, that's for me. Without getting too deep in the weeds too quick before the next question, I
Mm-hmm.
think that's the biggest piece. It's really context dependent to each situation, but the principles and the alignment and the objectives coming off that are going to be the biggest piece because the rest of the nuances are going to be really case dependent within each department.
No, well said. And you mentioned the importance of obviously alignment and then having objective measures to measure your performance. And obviously, your good friend in Pelly. What's sort of some technology that is sort of your non-negotiables, I guess, at collegiate level? Do you find both in the gym and on the field?
When it comes to a technology piece, one, if you can non-negotiable, even at the university setting, is uh is a funny piece because sometimes you're negotiating whether you can get one, let alone two. So if I have the funding for two, if I can have GPS and force plates, I'm good. Anything else is icing on the cake. That's my cake and that's my frosting. Anything else is sprinkles. So GPS and force plates. Uh, but that being said, I've been places where we've had neither. I've been places where we've had one. When I was at Florida Atlantic, we had GPS, and actually, we got a force plate, and I ended up calling some buddies with the Houston Astros. I had some buddies over at the Houston Astros, and ended up borrowing, slash convincing them to let me basically through them let me borrow a set of force decks. And then basically after that didn't go through, they put me in contact with the VP at Bald, ended up giving me a demo system. So I ended up get a free force player like, hey, like we can't let you like take one of their systems off the site, but if you buy one, like we'll let you use one during COVID because budget's probably gonna be an issue during COVID. So we ended up getting another plate. But like there's options, but again, I've been places where we just want barbells that aren't rusted and aren't bent. So again, it's context and nuance dependent. So it's really funny to have this conversation in the university setting because there's places where they only have one full-time strength coach. So it's just kind of like let's make sure we don't put the cart in front of the horse. So
100%. Yeah. Uh, when you're in that situation, I guess, let's say you do have enough force plates, how do you sort of replace for those college strength and conditioning coaches or those working university setting, and they don't have access to a GPS? What's sort of your favourite way to sort of replace that technology, and then vice versa if you've got GPS but you don't have force plates? What's your favorite way to sort of replace those objective measures?
Yeah, so I think if you don't have those things, I think honestly, the bigger your group size and the bigger your coach to athlete ratio, I think the more you need to lean on those. I think if you have those things and you have a say 1-to-1 or 1-to-5, especially in a return to play setting, return reconditioning setting, I think you can do some really cool, nuanced, individualized things depending on your constraints. But if you can't, I think you can rely on kind of what I was taught by some of my mentors. We mentioned earlier in the call. It's like the eye of the coach, right? Trust your eyes. Like, depending on like familiar you are with like Buddy Morris, like he always used to talk about, you know, you want to know how your athletes' readiness are without Omega Wave and GPS and, like RSI mod and force decks and so on and so forth. Is just walk in the room 15 minutes early, listen to your athletes. How are they on the foam roller when they're screwing around, jacking around on the turf before you call them up to start all their pre-session stuff, right? Are they quiet? Are they zombies? Are they jacking around, right? Are they all kind of hooting and hollering before you start the session, right? So that's your first litmus test, right? So, are they that's your first litmus test, right? Then how do they move, right? So even then, I've been lucky enough to have not like a close relationship, but lucky enough to have some conversations and have a little bit of relationship with Dan Paff, a buddy of mine, Chitty, and with Altus, and I think one of the coolest things that you watch and or you learn from him, and you like when you talk to him or you give any type of problem with him, big, small, little, medium, is you never hear him talk about force plates, objective testing. It's always everything goes back to the eye of the coach. It's everything's watching. Like on the Strength Coach Network, if you're ever to get on like that website, Gary Winflat's website, so Dan Powell's got a presentation on there, and he's going over He's going over an acceleration session over one of the sprinters, and for like 90 minutes, he's just looking at block starts. If I remember, I think it's block starts, just like 10-meter, 20-meter accels, and just different views, camera angles of one of the sprinters, and just the in depth knowledge and understanding of just like frame by frame knowledge he has of how his athlete should move, is moving relative to previous sessions, and just biomechanically and kinetically and kinematically he should move, whether it's reflexive supination of the foot, right? Co-contractions at the calf, at the knee, right? How the tibia's internally rotating, coming off of like toe off, and just like really like super complex stuff. And it's just like, like the smaller the group session, and I know this is probably isn't like the most complex thing, but I think the smaller the session, the smaller the group sizes are, the more intimate the session is. I think you can more rely on your abilities as a coach. So the trust, your conversations, your eyes, your gut feeling, your intuition, what your abilities are, your competencies as a coach. But if you don't, obviously, there's some other stuff out there. Right? For example, I mean, when it comes to like ACLs, they've done some single leg hop testing and the 10-5 rebound hop test, 10-5 rebound hop test. It was like say it was 10-5 rebound hop test with some validation in return and relative to like the three hop for distance for ACL for the ACL. There's all kinds of stuff. Even like if you look at like muscular endurance for the calf capacity test, if you're looking for like low grade, like low strength calf and like low strength muscular endurance, if you're trying to like measure calf endurance relative, if you're trying to prep for like return to running for like a Jones fracture or Achilles or like a calf or anything like foot related, there's stuff out there. But like to be honest, I think if you sit there objectively and monitor or like objectively think about what you're trying to accomplish with the group size, with the particular athlete, and what you have and what you don't have, and trust your eyes and your competencies of what you have and what you don't have, I think you're fine, honestly.
Yeah, 100%, which is pretty empowering for those that you might have a low budget, but like you said, if you can work on your coaching eye and develop that, it's going to put you in good stead for the rest of your career. What you mentioned in terms of alignment, once you've got your key staff appointed, at a college level? What are sort of some do's and don'ts in terms of team culture and building an effective team cohesion, I guess, or develop or maintaining that alignment amongst staff?
Okay, with staff. Okay, I got you. So when it comes to that clarity, I think when it comes to when it comes to clarity alignment, that's going to come with clarity. So alignment of like what are we going to do? What are our principles? That's going to come with clarity, and then clarity comes in what are we doing? Like what are we doing, and how are we doing it? And then who's doing what? Clarity in our roles, right? So who's going to handle the reconditioning? Who's going to handle the sports science? Who's going to handle the periodization for the gym? Who's going to handle the periodization for the speed and the power and the conditioning? And who's handling medical services and who's overseeing um, end stage rehab, or who's handling scheduling, or who's handling um, anything when it comes to like sport, like tactical development, so on and so forth. And so clarity, just simply clarity in roles, clarity in roles and crossover between the groups. And so I think that's a big thing, especially when you start looking at like who frustrations within people's individual roles. I think that's a big piece. And then what are we trying to do as an organization, and what am I trying to do every day when I come in the office, right? And then how can I improve? How can I do my job better? And how can I help us in feeling empowered myself to feel like I'm making a difference, not only for myself, for the department, but also for myself. So I feel I have passion and purpose to what I'm trying to do, what I'm trying to bring to work every day. So I'm not only giving the department a better product, but I'm giving myself a better product. So I'm bringing a return on investment for myself and the organization, right? So clarity in that as well. And it gives the athlete a better product as well. So, and then establishing a baseline of how we're going to operate. So, clarity also is going to come within communication, right? So, how we're going to handle things, right? So, cross collaboration, how we're going to communicate. So, that alignment and clarity is going to come within how our departments are going to operate within each other. Who's handling what? Who's overseeing early stage rehab? Who's overseeing mid stage rehab? Who's overseeing end stage? So, who's first in line? Who's second in line? Who's third in line? Who's first in charge in terms of scheduling weights, who's in charge, who gets priority for therapy in terms of, this is most important, this is second important. So early stage, okay, physical therapist is more important. So I'm supplementing whatever they do, right? So when we're all meeting on Friday to go over for the following week, right? Nutrition, medical, strength conditioning, sports science, so on and so forth. When we're all sitting down, right, there's clarity of what we know, what our roles are, we know what we need to go over. So when we sit down to talk about team periodization, what we're trying to accomplish over the next, say, 7 to 21 days, then we go over rehabs, so we all know what we're in charge of, we all know what we're trying to go. So there's alignment what we're trying to do, there's clarity in our role, so we know what we need to be prepared for, what we're trying to do. And there's also clarity in what we need to get ready for, say, that meeting, for that communication. So now we're giving each other cross collaboration. And now we're also educating the other department with our sub department as well too. So now there's a better understanding of how we can help each other and service each other, right? So now, as one hand is feeding the other hand, so now I can better understand. Because to be honest, in my role as a reconditioning return to play coordinator, as well as pretty much everywhere I've been for like the last 6 7 years now, I've probably learned the most, if not the most, some of the most I've ever learned from physical therapists, ATCs, medical orthopedics, and just overall medical side of things I have to carry over in the performance side, is how I operate and how I handle things and how I see things, more than I have just sets and reps and exercises, and how I see sets and reps and exercises. So I think that really helps. And then setting up the clarity, communication, and then comes the execution, right? And how you carry that out. And then obviously you audit and then you review. And a
Mm-hmm.
big, like, 30,000 foot review. Once you do all that and then you carry it out, you execute. And then same thing, like you actionably debrief post after the action, you debrief after, and then you do it all over. You do it all over again. You wash, rinse, repeat, and you just keep doing that over. And you step in the system, you execute it, you step out of the system to review it, you improve it, and you keep washing and rinse and repeating. And eventually you step out far enough and you look up and you realize how far you've come.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. That's such a great way of breaking it down. On that note, is it something that is just forever evolving? Because I imagine there's a new team member at certain periods of that process, and even if when you've had stability amongst staff after a couple of years, um, there might be change in roles and responsibilities, or just simply you're just trying to work on building towards this perfect product. But is there such thing as perfect? Is there always things that you're sort of constantly refining?
No, sorry, that sounded a little aggressive. No, I don't think there's something is always deemed as perfect. I think practical, operational for the current situation is perfect, right? And then the situation, the context changes, right? The
Mm,
science changes, right? The athlete changes, right? The system or budget or staffing changes, right? Something along the lines, and then you refine it again, or you find a nuance, or you can find a way to do something a little bit better, and then you audit, you review, you edit, and you improve it a little bit more, right? But when you step all the way back to step one to principles, right? So you have your administrative organizational principles, but like administrative organizational principles within each department, there's sub principles, right? That department has their principles, right? How that department's going to operate. And with each in that department, there's a tertiary department, right? There's tertiary principles, right? And each one of those sets of principles, right? Everything gets monitored again through principles, objectives, and then actionable results, right? And that being said, when you do that, right, you talk about staff turnover, everything else, staff turnover, recruitment, refinement. And the other thing too is that you're not going to be able to keep everybody in a perfect situation. That's reality. Even in pro sport, collegiate sport, people graduate, people improve to the point you can't. Money is not limitless, right? So you can't afford to keep everybody. And frankly, in a good system, you can. Like everybody, you got to pick and choose. So when somebody gets to the point you can no longer afford them, you hope they go and they leave and they pay better. But hopefully along the way, they improved enough to where you could give them enough raises. Now you have a higher salary for that position. So now the next person that steps into that role is at a better baseline than that person was when they came in.
mm,
But based on the organizational principles, the department principles, and then the sub principles of the tertiary principles of that role, right? Now that person already has a baseline established of how the organization, the department, and then that role all operates. So they already know clarity, communication, and execution of that role. And now all they have to do is edit, review, and refine their current role and make it better. So now it's everlasting. So now all they need to do is come in and be a little bit better than the last person. Now, when you go out and review and recruit and hire the next person, you want to be able to find and audit and recruit a person and identify a person that comes out and basically accentuates that role, right? That you're trying to hire and you're trying to identify. And you hopefully bring something to the table that at least minimum meets the thresholds of that role. But hopefully have one or two things that's that icing on the cake, right? The sprinkles on the cupcake, so to speak, right? To can bring a little bit more, right? Because a high performance department, right, it's everlasting, right? It's setting something up. It's revolving as in the fact that not that no matter it's not about it's about the people, but it's not the individuals there. It's about the system, right? The system's always spinning, right? Anybody can step out, but anybody can step in because it's about the principles, not the objectives and the end results. Because the principles are there, and if you know the principles, everybody understands how to work within the principles and the framework. So as long as you understand that, then you will understand how to work within it. That makes sense without getting too long winded.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And moving over, I guess, to more the technical side, programming. You mentioned earlier, the traditional way of doing things, trying to keep that squad mentality of everyone doing the same thing. And does that transfer into the gym when you're managing large groups? I imagine that does make things a little bit simpler, and team-based athletes do thrive in doing things as one. Or do you break groups up into different buckets sort of for your strength and power program in the gym? Sort of talk us through that.
Yeah, so from a performance perspective, I think again, without getting too long with it again, I think it goes back to your principles, right? What are we trying to achieve, right? What are the biodynamics, bioenergetics, right? All that jazz, right? The demands of the sport. What are we trying to achieve? What do we have to get them ready for? And then what are our constraints, right? What do we believe in? What are we able to do? What's our gym size? What's our gym space? What are we able to coach? Do we only have kettlebells? Do we have 10 racks and up 200 players? So on and so forth, right? And then what's their training age, right? What's our gym schedule, so on and so forth. So, I mean, especially in the current collegiate setting, honestly, on average, you're pretty much washing and rinsing the same variable programs no matter where you go. As you look at the average turnover for coaches or a coach over say every 2 to 4 years, because the average lifespan, because either it's especially with NIL and transfer portal, because you're not getting the chance to truly develop athletes anymore. To where you start talking about these buckets where LTAD and things like that. In theory, you could, but you pretty much need to have bare bones, check your boxes, speed, power, strength. Where do they need to be? Where should they be? What is the bare minimum threshold requirements of what's going to be healthy and act like healthy for them, right? And keep them eligible for selection, right? For practice and for games, right? So I think that's the biggest piece, right? Are they strong enough? Are they fit enough? Are they fast enough? And are they healthy enough, right? How you get there is going to be highly dependent on philosophy, whether you're, I don't know, your conjugate, West Side Olympic lifting, like Mike Boyle, functional training, whatever you're into, however, or you like a mix of everything, however you get to, it doesn't matter, right? At all. At the end of the day, especially the better the athlete you have, the less you need to do, right? Just don't break it. Get into the game, keep them healthy. Put brakes on a Ferrari, keep them healthy, right? You don't need to put a spoiler on. It's already fast, right? Just don't break it, right? Keep them healthy, right? So, but when you come to like bucketing and profiling, I think in a if now if you were able to keep them healthy, again, if you're in a perfect world, you would set your principles how you would define this is how we're going to define our power. This is how we're going to define our strength, our speed, our agility, our technical, our tactical, and our general fitness. And this is how we're going to measure it. This is how we're going to define it. This is how we're going to monitor it. And this is how we're going to progress it objectively, right? So that'd be fit our objectives, right? And this is our exit criteria from stage one, stage two, stage three, however many you need. For example, for us at Cal, typically we have three, right? We have a gold or elite, blue, average, white's basically your brand new group. Like you just got here, we don't know you, you don't know us, or you're a freshman, right? So this is like our just call it like our yeses 1 by 20, or like our just basic vanilla, right? Most basic stuff, right? How little can we do and most basic stuff can we do to keep all of our ace cards in our pocket, right? Because once we give you a stimulus or stimuli, right, the novelty of that stimulus is gone, right? If we do drop jumps or depth jumps, or we do flying sprints your freshman year, that novelty where we need it when you're in the gold group as a third year, fourth year player, we need to squeeze that last end of the toothpaste out of you, of that last group where we truly need to push that absolute speed out of you. And we really need to push that. We don't have the novelty, that stimulus anymore, because we've already done it. We already did it 3 years ago, but we might have already been pushing it for 3, 4 years ago. But we could have been working top end transition max velocity work, and then you get the whole conversation of like hamstrings and things like that. So I think for me, like it's important to run fast, but I think from case by case, I think on average, the farther and farther out, I think at least in football, I think most guys truly need to earn the right to sprint upright fast and often. I don't think they need to be held back from it, but I do from my case, especially in our space, they need to earn the right, and they probably, at least for us, they probably don't need as much as maybe we might see on social media as guys need, just because of the sport demands, and then you look at context of injury. So injury history, things like that, and just again the nature of the sport itself. So um, Like for me, I think there's probably very few guys where for me, like me and Matt Pell, who I brought up earlier, we talked about, I think a year ago, we talked about like flying 20s, and he was trying to convince me to do flying 20s. And so it's like, there's no, excuse my language, but there's no way in hell I would ever risk one of our receivers doing flying 20s. You like AFL, the amount of yardage and guys, you're like ground your guys cover, completely understand it. But our guys, if I got to go explain to like our head coach or offensive coordinator, like why our future NFL All SEC or All Pac-12 wide receivers out for 6 weeks with a grade two bicep fib because I ran a flying 20 with them. And I could have just ran, I could have done an Excel build or a walk in. I could do walk in Excel holds or walk like skip in 20s or skip in 30s or so like some other upright sprinting and still hit all of his max velocity work, dribble bleeds, wickets, all these other stimulus we could have given him and kept him healthy. I mean, to each their own, but I like my job. I like my job. So, it's just like roll the toothpaste. Just don't squeeze it all out at once. You know what I mean? And some guys
100%.
just, again, sorry, not to get too long winded, but just, so Al Miller, if you ever read the book The System, he always used to tell me the story. He always like, and he's like, again, like a grandpa to me. So always like tells me the story probably once a year. So he was a strength coach for the Denver Broncos back in the 80s. And he had John Elway. John Elway is obviously the quarterback for people, for the guys, people who don't know American football can Google him, but those are dudes, John Elway's Hall of Fame quarterback, right? And something he learned from the Russians was you never truly know sport or technical mastery or truly where basically what he learned from the Russians were what they learned in their research during the USSR, during all their research, during all that was you truly never know an athlete's true genetic potential or true genetic mastery of where they are till 10 years. It takes 10 years to fully develop athletic potential of an athlete. And he truly stood by that statement. Now, the collective bargaining agreement, players union, all those rules in the NFL were different. They trained those guys the way we train our guys in college now. And the stories and videos he showed me of Joe Montana was snatching 100 kilos, 120 kilos, squatting 220 kilos, 240 kilos, or excuse, yeah, squatting 240 kilos. He was strong. He was a strong guy, right? He's quarterback. I don't know many quarterbacks do it anymore, right? Just on average, right? But that being said, and he was told me, he's like, to be honest, he's like, he was a, Al Miller used to tell me this, he's the only guy that I ever got that close to 10 years. He's like, and I only coached John Elway for 9 years. He's the closest I ever got to that 10-year mark. He's like, and I coached a long time. And he's the closest I ever got to that 10-year marker. So putting that in perspective, I mean, and you think about our exercise progressions, exercise selections, exercise intensities, things like that. And then, so when somebody's had that much success, it's been around that many high quality players with Michael Vick, John Elway. It's had a lot of success, helping develop along a lot of high level athletes along the way. And they constantly remind me that the closest he ever got was one guy at 9 years. And then I'm trying to, squeeze all the toothpaste out at once. It's a humbling reminder that, hey, maybe I need to do a little bit more rudiment extensive stuff with this kid, not go immediately to the most intensive alactic power stuff possible,
100%. Yeah, that's a great way to, I guess, just break it down in terms of keeping the basics in the program, and like you said, not trying to squeeze the toothpaste on one session, but roll it. I like that analogy, and yeah, it does get you thinking. For all coaches listening, I guess, what would you expect to, or how long when you're in a new program or a program that you've been in for a couple of years? Like, how long do you think you're going to have that same athlete for? And when you think about it that way, 9 years is a long time, with turnover of coaches and elite athletes as well. So yeah, that's a really good one. Going back to the collegiate athlete, in terms of managing, I guess, the other demand outside of the sport, like the academic stress, being a teenager, so partying, all the lifestyle aspects of it. Like, how do you sort of take that into consideration with either your coaching or your programming?
I think honestly, I hate to keep using the crutch of context, but I think it's a little bit of case dependent on where you've been. So for example, at Cal, our kids have like a pretty rigorous academic schedule. So you gotta keep that in mind. And it's a little erratic a little bit amongst, especially with like the size of our roster. There's basically like a 2 month window, for example, in the middle of our season. And pretty much in college football, it's not quite like the NFL or pro sports where you could lose a couple games and sneak into a wild card and go to the Super Bowl and you're okay. In college football, you lose one game, you're probably out of national championship contention. But you could probably sneak in. You lose two, you're done, right? But you lose one, you're more than likely done, right? So you have one bad weekend, you're screwed, right? So for us, we have for Cal, we probably have like a almost dang near a 2 month window where like any of our like a large chunk of our kids could have like midterms for like 2 weeks, and our kids have like hard classes. Like I have kids, like one of my rehab kids now is like he helps me code Python, and like he's like legitimately helps me code Python. Like, hey Mason, like can you help me? Like I'm trying to fix this and plot this and pull out like rolling averages on like peak game demands on this, and I'm trying to figure out like you want to help me? Like I screw up this line of code. You want to help me with this? Yeah, sure. Like so like our kids are like teaching me things and they're like 19 years old. So like we have smart kids, like literally future rocket scientists, right? So our kids are up late studying, going to class, whatever. So they have real, like not other kids don't, but and that's probably I haven't always, for me personally, I haven't had that everywhere I've been. So you got to account for that more. So it's again having a little bit more of a pulse on your kids. So again, having a little bit more of a conversation, knowing the kids, knowing the context of where you're at, and then sometimes potentially being a little bit maybe agile in your approach. And then I think agile in your approach, and I think a lot of times I think for me and what I've learned in those experiences in those cases, a lot of times it's the dosage of intensity that I think I've pulled back on in those cases. So it's like volume as a whole, whether it's extensive or intensive volume, whether it be field work or gym work per se, right? So across the board as a whole, where I know if they're going through a heavy period of outside life stuff or school stuff or just say sports stuff as a whole, I know it's a combination or it's upcoming or they're kind of catching it up from all ends. I know that I probably need to be a little bit more honestly overly conservative than probably what I've been taught from textbooks, right? Especially depending on the athletes where they're probably in our sport. Uh, some of the athletes that I'm dealing with are probably a bit more of what you would consider like a high responder, like genetically just kind of truly freaky. So like, like Prilepin's chart tells me like optimally I could hit 10 reps at between 80 and 90%. But some of these kids, 10 reps at 82.5% of relative intensity will fry them for like a week, right? So maybe a relative intensity of 84% for three singles is enough to give them what they need for the week at that exercise, right? Or maybe it's just like a triple, like a top set, right? So 9 total reps, right? We hit three full speed sprints, right? They hit their top off. They hit their top offs, right? We go in, we hit three singles or a single at that exercise, a triple at their second exercise, a couple of supplemental sets, and then we're done. The gym session's 40 minutes, right? Or there's other times where it's hey, you hit this one time, we're done, right? So I think it's being a little bit. I think it's trying to be a little bit more kind of not ad libish, but working with the athletes and understanding where they're at, but also that comes with the thorny side of it is having that push pull. So now you're kind of pulling back to help them out. But then also there's times when you kind of, if you're familiar with like Milad Jovanovich's like agile periodization, his book, and he's Serbian and he's crazy and everything else, but his like push the ceiling, pull the floor aspect, you talk about pull. You talk about pulling the. He talks about pulling the floor, kind of what we just talked about, kind of meeting the athlete where they are, right? But sometimes, especially in the rehab piece too, it's based off what you talked about. It's like there's a point where like you got to lead a horse to water. Well, the counter argument is, well, they don't always drink. Well, sometimes you got to put their head in the water and make them drink, right? It's forced adaptation, right? You gotta Sparta kick them into super compensation and into the SRA curve, right? So that happens too. So like life happens, but we all got to be adults, and you got to adapt or die. So I hate to be a little gruesome, but it is what it is sometimes. So we all got things we got to do.
100%. Well said, mate. And what about insights into the recruitment process? Is it something that you're involved in your role? How does that typically take place? How long does the recruitment process go on for bringing in new talent?
Um, it depends on the university and on the coaching staff. Um, for example, I've been in places where I've seen them recruit seventh and eighth graders that are 14 years old, 15 years old, because the kid comes in and he's as big as an avatar, and he's 13 years old. He's 6'4", and he's got traps up to the top of his ears, and he's like looks like he put me in his pocket, and like it's like holy crap, like you're a first round pick and you're 15 years old, like you're scary, right? But you're gonna be a really good football player, right? So you got guys like that are just like genetic freaks, and like they're massively impressive, and then you got other guys where they're late bloomers and you don't really like find them till they don't really do anything till they hit the camp circuit. And so universities have these camp circuits in the summer, and they don't really, whether they play for a good high school team, or they switch positions, or they go to a bunch of different high schools, they don't get picked up till, or not picked up, but they don't really get noticed till late in their junior year, the summer camp circuit going into their senior year. So it's really kind of hit or miss on the athlete themselves and their developmental process, as you guys know firsthand. So it's really dependent on that situation. And then also the staff is their self, kind of how they handle things and how they view camps, how they view the recruiting process, in the individual. But my role is all really dependent on that. So sometimes it's kind of like a supplemental, kind of like a pat on the back, like pat on the butt, like, hey, like y'all have been doing a really good job. Like, yeah, that kid looks really good. Like, cool. Like he's not broken. Like he looks fast. Good job. Like, yeah, I approve. Right. Then there's been other situations where it's, hey, like we're not really sure like what's wrong with this kid, or like we're not really sure if we like this kid. Like, what do you think? Right. And then you go watch like a session, they put him through a workout, or they're in a camp, or they'll show you like his highlight or game film, and you kind of watch him move and you give him an opinion. Like it could be as simple as that. There's a situation where 12 hours before a camp, head coach asked me, hey, like we got like a group of kids that are like really high profile recruits. So like we haven't offered, but we want to offer them, but they don't want to run their 40s. Can we put GPS on them? And like we're gonna set up our pass, like our we're gonna set up our camp script, our routes on air script at the beginning of camp. The set up, like if you tell us how you want to set it up, or how you want to do it, like we'll set up our script during that period to like, so we know, so timestamp it, so like when they really open up, where we can mark it out, see how fast they run. And end up doing like forced velocity profiles for these kids, like high school kids, to figure out basically to hack their 40 times. Do you start looking at like the Kid Clark, Peter Wayne research, you start figuring out split times and things like that. I had, for example, like a DB's coach was like, hey, I really like this kid. He didn't really run a great 40, but he's got the height, he's got the wingspan, he's got the length, like he's got the measurables. It looks right, it flies right, he plays well. Is there any testing we can do, like to see if there's like something athletically? And I was like, you know what, like, yeah, I put him on the force plate and did a bunch of like Carmelo Bosco testing with him. Started looking at like just different time windows, and just like Carmelo Bosco variant testing with him, and started looking at what he was deficient in and what he was good at, and started running some of the numbers with him. And I went over with our corners coach and was like, hey, like this is what he's good at. This is not what he's good at. This is kind of probably where he's going to be. This is probably what he's dominant in, or this is probably what he's poor in, and this is probably what you're going to get out of him based on where he's at. I can't say anything about other than that without saying like his film, but this is kind of what you got. So, in a nutshell, it's highly dependent. It's highly dependent. There are some other universities where they're doing some really cool stuff. Um, I know a couple of school. At least I know of one school that I have a friend at that we're not currently doing here. That we're not currently doing here, but I know one other school where they're basically doing some optical tracking, and basically what they're doing is they're not only using their film, uh, they're not using just their film, but they're actually pulling in high school recruiting film, and basically they're able to pull in a kid's high school recruiting film, and they're able to see how long it takes him to change direction from point A to point B, how long it takes him to run a three-step slant, how long it takes him to run a to chase down the ball carrier from here to here, right? Or so on, so forth, right? And they're able to go back and overlay that with previous recruits and previous players they've had. And they're able to like mailbox all these different athletes based off of anthropometrics, athletic quality specific to the position. So now when they sit at a table, they're able to say, well, Johnny, I think he looks like, I think he looks like Alex and he plays like Alex and this, that, and the other. It's like, okay, well, Johnny was 5'9" and 200 pounds, but Alex is 6'4" and 230 pounds. Not even close. They might be just as fast, but he's got 7 inches and about 40 pounds on him. I don't think so, right? So you start overlaying all the different stuff, and now it truly becomes objective because, like, when it comes to like the recruiting piece, that's like the hard, like that's probably the hardest piece when you're trying to project like kids that age. Is there's a lot of like tradition and like nuance of like eye of the coach, but you're projecting 14 to 18-year-old kids. Like you and I both
Yeah,
know that there's about this much of like unknown plus everything else in between under my desk that we can't see. This like you don't know till you know.
100%. It's a thorough process. What was the Kamalo Bosch? Was it jump testing process you're
Carmelo
talking about there?
Bosco. Yep. So yeah.
Bosco.
So yeah. So yeah. So he's got yeah. So he was obviously an Italian sprints coach back in the '70s and '80s, and I think Antonio Scianti actually just got done translating one of his books. If you go to Ultimate Athlete Concepts, uh, he's got a couple of his books that have been translated over there. They're all pretty good.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing it. You mentioned, at times programs won't have a nutritionist, sports psych, so these other sort of, important, I guess, support systems and networks for athletes and their development. What's the best way or most effective way, do you think, if you're a high performance coach listening to this and you're the person for the program? Do you bring, have consults with experts about how you can tackle that? Is it presentations? From an education point of view, to influence their sort of elite lifestyle and things they're doing away from training. What do you think is some important tips and tricks for coaches to take on?
Yeah, I think when it comes to like that area, I think honestly, like it's kind of funny because it's kind of backwards of what you asked me earlier when you asked me about what are my top two like sports science like must have technologies. Um, I think you win with people, and what I mean when it comes to like high performance. So when it comes to like a departmental piece, I think not only do you want to hire the best people, I think if you lack people and you lack body, so to speak, and you lack departments themselves. So I think you either go about two ways. Either you educate and empower the people you currently have. So if you can't get the funding to hire and create departments, then you do the best you can to outsource consulting, right? So whether it's you do part-time consulting, which I know a buddy of mine, Pratik Patel, does like some former NFL nutritionist and university nutritionist who does like some consultant work for a lot of professional teams on individual athletes on the side after he left the New York Giants. He does some stuff like that now. So there are people who do that, especially on the psych side as well too. You can do that too, but also I think it's important to educate yourself and your staff so you can quickly elevator pitch your athletes, your department, your coaches, so you guys can quickly do the small rock stuff yourself. And then honestly, especially if you're the person in the big swivel chair with the big office at the top, I think not only educating and empowering the people you have as well too, but if you don't have the people, then honestly, as being one of the people under that person, it's I personally think it's important for that person to find the ways to get the funding or the money or the processes or whatever it takes to get the ability to get those positions or resources available to get those things done, right? Because it's not always about the end result of how it says. Sometimes it's just about getting things done in terms of creating departments and creating roles and creating positions. And it's not always about the actual object or technology. Sometimes it's just about, again, we talked about winning with people, just creating, increasing salaries to retain, recruit, and hire, but also creating roles within the department themselves. So I think that's the biggest piece too. So I think that gets lost too, especially when you start talking about high performance is, well, we need EMG testing, we need force plates, we need GPS. It's like, okay, no, we have a head strength coach, we have one full-time assistant, we have a GA and a part-time intern. No, we need full-time strength coaches, we need a nutritionist, we need a nutrition budget, and we need barbells that aren't bent, and we need new plates, and we need new socks for the athletes because they only have one pair of socks for 2 workouts a day. No, like let's make sure we put our views in perspective. So again, let's not put the cart before the horse because like some colleges and some universities and athletic departments are dealing with the same problems high schools are dealing with and like real world people are dealing with, even though everybody sees on Twitter it's rainbows and butterflies. So again, you
Yeah.
win with people.
Yeah, that's a great way to sort of wrap it up. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you'd like to share on this topic in terms of giving an insight in high performing programs at the collegiate level?
I think the biggest thing is I think the last thing we talked about is empowering. I think the biggest thing gets lost in that process is we talked about creating a system with principles and empowering the people. You win with people, and you not only win with more people and a bigger budget, whatever it is, and salaries, retention, recruitment, but it's empowering the people you have currently and empowering them to do the things they do well because they're going to help you create the system. It's not this tyrannical, patriarchal, ivory tower, high performance role where this one person sitting at the top trying to run and delegate and do everything. That person is truly in a managerial role, especially if it's an admin person and their role is to administrate and make sure everybody's getting what they need. And then obviously, especially in the collegiate setting, like there's an administrator. Their job is to make sure everything's getting done, right? Like, what do you guys need to do your jobs, right? And a lot of times that person wants to step too far in the weeds and be in the day to day objectively instead of stepping back to get things done, right? And then you have the head of performance, right? Or so to speak, head of performance, head of high performance. Truly, it's like again, a little not 50,000, but 30,000 foot view, right? Overseeing the performance. So it's like understanding those roles, and then those people are helping set and drive and operate and monitor the principles or objectives of those principles and hiring the people under them and letting those people do their jobs underneath them to help build and drive and keep the system spinning, which I see a lot of the times in my own experiences and what I've seen previously, where the people in the system are just kind of stuck on the carousel, just kind of riding, but they're not helping build it. They're just kind of waiting to get told how to ride and like whether they need more pennies to stay on the ride or they have to get off the ride, so to speak. You know what I'm saying? So those people in the system and in the high performance department and in the organization ecosystem are just as important in building it as they are as maintaining it, right? Because they bring things and skill sets and perspective to it that other people don't have. So and that's why you have a multitude of people. So I think that's a part of high performance is deliberation and communication and diversity.
Fantastic. And what about pet peeves, Zach? Anything that sort of fires you up, makes you angry from the industry point of view?
Oh, I think that probably was a little bit of it. I think for me, it's pet peeves when it comes to high performance. I think a little bit of it's like probably overt tradition because I told you so. I think that's probably a big one. I think I've probably been I'm probably very much of, even though I'm thinking now I'm older, I can confidently say it's probably a fault of mine as well as a pet peeve. It's kind of very much of a Beastie Boys kind of fight the power. I'm very much of like a free thinker. I work well in the system, but I don't work well oppressed in the system. And I'm very much of diagnosed with ADHD, and it's okay. I work well with it, but it's also knowing one of those people. I don't work well with a lot of constraints. You give me the rules, give me the principles, and I'll bring you back a Picasso. But if you put me in a straitjacket, I'm gonna look like I'm in a straitjacket. So that's like, for me, like that's a pet peeve of mine. For me, that's a pet for me, it's like freedom. Like as a practitioner, it's, tell me what I got to do. Tell me how you work. Tell me how I need to get it done. Tell me the rules of the game. Tell me the rules of the game, and tell me how not to break the game. And I'm like, I'll bring you back Super Bowl. Like I'll try to bring you back Super Bowl trophy, right? Because I've really really enjoyed my job. So and then I think from like a professional standpoint, I think one of my other pet peeves is, I see it a lot more now. Is I see it. I used to see it a lot. I see it a lot. Like kind of. I wouldn't say the social media strain coach, but it's both ends, especially if you see like the older coach who like just kind of does what they've always done, but they don't ever actually pick up a textbook. But then you see the younger coaches who like don't pick up textbooks or research or academic research or like do any like literature reading, anything like that. And everything they learn, quote, or like do is like off of social media. So like there's no context or reasoning behind it. So it's like, and don't get me wrong, I've learned or kind of at least went down a rabbit hole and like got some ideas, and like, I've had to go down like it's extra ramps. But I think for me, like that's a bit of a pet peeve. So it's, like you start having conversations with people, and they're like, oh, isometrics this or whatever. It's like everybody's like quoting Alex Notera, who's a genius, by the way. And I love Alex Notera, but you start asking people about the questions, and I don't think on average, like people fundamentally understand what he's trying to do at times. It's kind of like, did you actually read and listen to what he's trying to say, or like you actually fundamentally understand like what he's trying to do? So it's just, people like doing the legwork and doing the homework. That's kind of a pet peeve of mine, but I digress. So I enjoy the process of being wrong and learning. So, but that's just me.
What about days off? Do you get many of them? And when you do, how do you like to spend them?
Days off. Probably haven't had as many as I wanted to as of recently over the last few years, just with the job. But when I do get them, I'm a bit of a peckerhead. I'm originally from West Virginia, so that's the boonies. It's the middle of sticks and nowhere. So that's the stereotypical, southeastern Appalachian, kind of American. For those who don't know. So I like to be out. I like to get out in the woods, I fish, I hunt. I got a family property. So I like to be outside. I'm not very much of like a city like people person. So I'm pretty distant, like a peace and quiet, like getting out in the woods. Like I said, I'm pretty simple. Before I had over the last like almost 3 years now, I've had bilateral FAI and hip labrum repairs. But before that, I was pretty consistent, pretty big into my BJJ and jiu-jitsu. So I'd like to get a little further out from the second hip surgery, see if I can get back into that. So we'll see how that goes.
Awesome. Very good. And what about, we're halfway through 2023. What's on the horizon for you? What are you most excited about for the rest of the year?
So I think for me, it's getting to the season, since we're 5 weeks away from that, and then that'll pretty much consume my life till the next year starts. And then I think the next step for me, just life outside of work, is I think within the next 6 months to a year. I think the plan for me is to get started back on course to start my PhD. I was on track till I started at Berkeley. My job at Berkeley, I was on track to start my PhD, and then got a little off track when I took this job for coaching staff changes. So I'm hoping I can get back on track to do that, but we'll see how that goes.
What's the topic of your PhD? What's the research?
Originally it was gonna be based around some hamstring research and some sprint research and hamstring research. But if you're familiar with like Jason Weber over there, me and him have had some conversations over that. So we'll see it stays in that ballpark and how that goes. Me and him have had some good conversations. He's kind of turned into a friend and a mentor over the last about a year or so. So I should mention him earlier. So we'll see. That's originally what it was going to be, but we'll see if it stays in that area.
Very good. Well, plenty happening, and I really appreciate you jumping on. Obviously, it's late, a bit close to over 9 o'clock at night where you are. So I really appreciate you jumping on and sharing with us your experiences, some stories, and of course some wisdom for the listeners when it comes to collegiate high performing programs. For those that have some follow up questions, are you on social media? Is that the best place to get in contact for some follow up questions from the audience?
Yeah. So I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on that one. I kind of check it if I get a notification. I'm on Twitter. I kind of check it. I think my Instagram I check the most because I think it's the one that doesn't make me the most annoyed. So if you if you answer me that one, I'll probably answer that one the quickest. I think it's like coach underscore Zach 32. I think it's all the same.
Yep.
So, but if you just Google my name, if you could how to spell my last name, just get close, and I'm sure it'll pop up. There's not many people with my last name, but anyway, if Jack puts my name in the info, it'll pop up. So feel free to reach out. I'll answer as quick as I can. I'm not the best, but I promise I'll get back at some point.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I'll add the links into the show notes for those listening in, so you can easily click it and get access to. Yeah, well, thanks, Zach. I've taken away plenty. Got a couple of pages full of notes. So really appreciate you jumping on and sharing with us your experiences in the industry, and yeah, all the best for the rest of the year and the upcoming competitive season. For those that have tuned in halfway through, make sure to watch the whole episode. You can find it on our YouTube channel until we post it on our podcast in an upcoming Wednesday in the next 3 weeks. Our next live chat is with another strength and power coach, Daniel Juvuvanak Zaknich. That'll be on the 27th of June at 3 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. So I'll see you guys then. Thanks again, Zach.